In this lesson, we're finally going to create base component to represent button, and initially we'll reuse this component for registration and authentication buttons, as well as for the button that resides within app newsletter content component in here. So based on the markup of this button, we're going to create new component. I'm gonna switch over to app newsletter content component. And right here, I will extract this markup and create new component with the name app button. As always, we're gonna create the file for this component within components folder. And in here, I'm gonna paste markup of the button. The content for each button we're going to pass from outside when we'll use button components. So I'm gonna use slot component in here, and the content that has to be injected at the place of this slot component, I'm going to specify in between a button component tags, like so. Let's also take a look at the button that is used inside the registration form. It has a bunch of classes assigned to it, but thankfully we already have most of those classes in our button component. I'm going to take some of the classes from this list and assign them to the class attribute of the app button component. In this case, we need to use only two classes such as sm::text base as well as text sm class. There are still some minor differences in classes between these two lists, but they are not crucial, so I'm going to stick to the first list of classes to make all buttons in the application consistent in terms of styles. Alright, time to reuse a button component in other places, such as login and registration forms. So let's copy usage of the app button component, paste it in here, and remove the old markup of the button. The label should say login in this case, and inside of register.view component, we're going to use the same app button component, but in this case, we're gonna pass sign up label and remove the old code for the button. Alright, cool. As you can see in Vue component 3, both of those buttons are now represented by the app button component. But those buttons are not the only buttons used in the application so far. If we'll open up app hero content component, in here we're gonna see a couple more buttons such as explore and learn more that look like this. And for those buttons, we're also going to reuse app button component. So let's start with the explore button. I'm gonna add app button component right here. But in this case, those buttons are represented by the links, not by the button tags. So we're gonna have to find a way to render links instead of buttons in some cases, and which tag to render we're going to decide based on the fact whether to attribute was passed or not. So I'm going to use Nuxt link component within app button component, but only in those cases where additional to attribute will be passed. We can reference this attribute via attrs variable like so, and if it will be passed, we're going to show Nuxt link component instead of the button component, and we're gonna pass attribute 2 further into this Nuxt link component. And also we're gonna pass additional classes to this component that I'm going to extract into classes constant. So let's create script tag and declare new constant classes that is going to be an array of classes. So let's take all this existing list of classes on the button and use it right here. And then if attribute 2 will not be passed, we're going to simply render button tag instead. And just because the explore button has to be represented as a link, we're going to supply additional prop 2 as we're doing in the original markup. And there we go, we're seeing that the first explore button has appeared, and this button, unlike the other two buttons, is represented by our new app button component. And just because we have additionally passed to attribute, the next link component was used to render this button instead of a button tag. But of course, currently styles of this button is different from other two buttons. Let's make them the same. First of all, I'm going to define a list of classes that have to be assigned to every button, no matter whether it's a link button or a normal button. So the following classes will always be used on buttons. And we will also have an option to specify the size of the button from outside by using additional prop. So right here I'm gonna declare a couple more list of classes, and based on the additional prop that we're going to declare soon, I'm going to decide which one of those two list of classes to assign to the button. Here's how it is going to work. Let's declare prop with a name LG that we will be able to use to specify the size of the button. This prop will be optional and the type of this prop will be Boolean. And since this is an optional prop, let's assign default value for this prop, which will be false. So by default buttons will not be large. And then I'm gonna reference this prop LG right here with a negation sign to indicate that this list of classes has to only be assigned to normal size buttons, unlike the second list of classes that are intended to be used only for large buttons. So let's follow the same logic and also add another block of styles right here. In the same way, we're going to use different list of classes for primary and secondary buttons. We'll declare additional secondary prop to indicate whether the button has to be primary or secondary. And then based on this prop, we're going to decide which classes to assign to the button. So let's add this secondary prop that is also going to be a Boolean value, and the default value will be false for this prop. So now we have a way to specify the type of the button as well as its size when we're gonna use this app button component. And based on the prop 2 that we can pass or not pass when using app button component, it will be decided what to use to render this button, whether Nuxt link component or simple button tag. Alright, back to app hero content component. In here we'll have to add another button, which will be a learn more button. Let's also specify proper value for to attribute, which will be features hash. And now let's remove the old markup of buttons and check result in the browser. And there we go, both buttons have been rendered, but for now they don't have proper sizes, and the second button has to be secondary. It is very easy to achieve because we have a way to supply additional LG prop whenever we want the button to be large. So let's add prop LG and check the result. And we're seeing how the first button has been increased in size. And as for the second button, in this case, we're also going to increase it in size by passing LG prop. But additionally, we're also going to specify that this button has to be secondary, so I'm going to pass secondary prop as well. Let's also inspect those buttons, and we're gonna see that for the first button, secondary prop is false, hence it is rendered as a primary button, and the second button has been rendered as a secondary button because secondary prop is true. And those 4 buttons on the registration and login pages still look as before. The link to the source code of this project will be as always in the video description.